Well, welcome to balmy Boulder, to CU Law, and the home of the Silicon Flatirons Center for Technology, Law, and Policy. For 25 years, Silicon Flatirons has focused on a threefold mission: to elevate the debate on tech policy, to support tech entrepreneurship in this community in particular, and to inspire, prepare, and place students into opportunities in these areas. Of course, for those of you who know Silicon Flatirons, this should all sound familiar. What's new today is the MC. Yours truly. So my name is Matt Schmit. I'm the new executive director here at Silicon. And for the past 15 plus years, I've worked at the intersection of technology and economic competitiveness. I have to tell you, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and to join this incredible team. So I should take this opportunity to recognize Shannon and Christine, Sarah and Nate have put into. Now, when I assumed this role on November, just a couple of months ago, we had this great team, an incredibly engaged community around us, and that 25-year track record and all the expectations that followed. Since then, my goal has been simple, folks. Don't mess this up. And so I hope that continues here today. Now, last summer, the Silicon Flatirons team workshopped the idea of technology haves and have-nots as a possible conference theme for this weekend. Now, of course, I took that idea and ran with it. And so the results: to have and have not, emerging asymmetries in communications technology. Our conference hopes to accomplish a few things here today. One, to live up to the 25-year track record. Two, to reach those lofty expectations that we all have. And to three, meet the moment, one in which technological advance is considerably outpacing our public policy, or I think anything resembling cultural consensus on technology. Now, for the next 2 days, we explore the real, perceived, and potential haves and have-nots in artificial intelligence, radio spectrum allocation, and internet access. And for those wanting more, we're piloting a few new ideas this year. On Monday afternoon, we have something new: the Spectrum Security and Resilience Summit, focused on emerging gaps, threats, and information asymmetry related to radio frequency and public safety. For those interested in the topic or here, we hope you can join us. All right, now before moving on, I want to acknowledge the space that we occupy. As we gather, we honor and acknowledge that the University of Colorado Law School is on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, the Cheyenne, and the Ute peoples. Further, we acknowledge the 48 contemporary tribal nations historically tied to the lands that comprise what is now called Colorado. Truly, it's a special place. It is my honor to introduce our welcome keynote, Brett Frischmann, the Charles Widger Endowed University Professor in Law, Business, and Economics at Villanova University. Without further ado, Brett.
Good morning, everyone. Speaking with you, as we've just heard, the next 2 days promise to be filled with exciting discussions of interdisciplinary research and public policy issues facing this community. As the opening keynote, my task is to plant some intellectual seeds, raise some provocative questions, and according to my youngest son, not be too boring. So before turning to the issue of asymmetries and access to AI, I'd like to reflect on the shared goals of this community concerning access to digital networks. So most folks in this community agree that universal service is a laudable goal. Universal service policies aim to make available affordable telecommunications and other services to the public, focus on closing gaps in coverage and ensuring the provision of services to rural, remote, and low-income users who would otherwise not be served in the absence of these policies. Now, while initially focused on local phone service, we've expanded to the internet and broadband, and soon we'll be talking about AI. While there's still room for improvement, plenty, and work still to do, we've made progress in getting people throughout this country connected to the internet. We've successfully connected schools and libraries, businesses and homes, and pretty much everywhere else in between that one can imagine. Ubiquitous, always-on digital networks is what this community has championed and more or less successfully delivered over the past few decades. Now, sure, there have been disagreements among Republicans and Democrats on the means and even sometimes the priorities, but there's been agreement at least on this ambitious goal. No one left behind. Everyone on board, everyone online, connected by the devices we carry and wear, all of which is enabled by the digital infrastructures that this community has built. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Just think about the digital cornucopia of applications layer services, platforms, software, apps, content, and even social connections. Some call it abundance, and they get very excited about the elimination of scarcity. Now, abundance is created by leveraging the non-rivalrous capacity of network, software, and data to make everything accessible to everyone online. There should be no asymmetries or gaps to worry about. The digital network world we've built celebrates seamless interconnection of networks and people. It enables frictionless transactions that are so cheap, so easy, that virtually everyone can and should participate. It democratizes speech so that everyone can speak to everyone, many to many, with maximum scale and scope. I mean, any one of us, or I suppose all of us, can speak to millions of people distributed all around the world at nearly zero marginal cost and nearly instantaneously. In fact, I suspect many of you out there in the audience are doing that right now. I mean, it's really astonishing. We have abundant access to knowledge with a mere click or a voice command. More access to information than any time in human history. I mean, it almost sounds too good to be true, like a utopian fever dream. And it is. Look, access to Wikipedia doesn't actually make anyone smarter, nor does being able to ask Alexa. It takes a whole lot more to produce knowledge. Outsourcing thinking at scale only leads to idiocracy, as we've seen. Open access to ChatGPT does not democratize education, lawyering, healthcare services, therapy, or anything else really. But it sure does create a lot of unpaid labor for teachers, parents, healthcare workers, everyone else responsible for anything real and serious. The world is on fire. We've moved too fast and we've broken too many things. And what kills me, I mean, I can't stress this enough, it literally breaks my heart and mind every single day, is that we don't seem to have learned anything from our mistakes. I'm sorry to say this, but we're approaching supposedly smart tech, AI, in exactly the same way, with the same mindset, the same fear of missing out or fear of falling behind, the same laziness in accepting hype, entire techno-fascist babble, just refusing to slow down. Why are we rushing to inject AI into everything, into every aspect of our lives, our relationships, our institutions, our very humanity? We should step back and reconsider our priors, call to question the unchallenged commitment to a particular and a particularly warped vision of progress. Universal, always-on digital tech is not the unadulterated boon that everyone thought. In fact, it seems like a trap for the masses, and especially the poor and middle class. After all, the rich and powerful enjoy the luxury of being able to exercise their freedom to be off. They get to choose when and under what conditions they're subject to surveillance, subject to nudging, subject to manipulation, and by whom. Their kids don't need to attend schools inundated with digital devices, screens, and crappy ed tech software that's never been proven to actually improve learning. Now, this is the growing asymmetry that I worry about, the gap that really matters. Those who can genuinely exercise their freedom to be off, to be free from surveillance, nudging, manipulation, and other forms of technosocial engineering. Now, my time's limited. This is just an opening keynote, so I can't fully spell out the various ways in which the world's on fire or explain why, nor can I fully provide a to-do list for putting out existing fires or the many we know are on the horizon. So what I'd like to do is cultivate some new ideas for further discussion over the next few days. Now, first, I want to acknowledge that, like many of you, I'm absolutely committed to the underlying ideal of universal service and enabling public access to the basic infrastructures of modern society, the ones we need. I mean, after all, I wrote my first book, Infrastructure, the Social Value of Shared Resources, back in 2012. And the core ideas about infrastructure and governance remain integral to my thinking. Among other things, I defended this thing called network neutrality regulation. Don't worry, we're not going down the rabbit hole for the umpteenth time at this conference. What I want to note is that my defense of net neutrality concerned a rather unconventional way of thinking about the issue, relevant for much of what we're dealing with today. Net neutrality sustained a governance theme by leveraging friction in the design of the internet's layered architecture to constrain the ability of network providers to exercise their control over user activities that would otherwise be enabled by their privileged view of traffic that's flowing across the network. In other words, network neutrality governed the exercise of data-driven or intelligence-enabled power. Now, as far as I know, I could be wrong. I mean, it seemed to it sort of worked. I mean, Comcast, Verizon, and the like are not really the villains in our dystopian hellscape, are they? I mean, they're not to blame for widespread mis and disinformation, deepfakes gone wild, filter bubbles, engineered addiction and isolation on social media platforms that are optimized for superficial engagement, sycophantic Gen AI chatbots designed to generate trust in untrustworthy psychopaths, rampant polarization, democracy disrupted, ... you get the point. No, we're all passengers on Silicon Valley's runaway train. Their fever dream of universal AI and worse, AGI, is taxing the infrastructural capacity of the shared resources we actually need, including energy, our environment, governance institutions, the time and attention for meaningful social interaction. Now, plenty of people have written diagnoses of our succumbing to Silicon Valley imperatives. Perhaps the most popular are Shoshana Zuboff's surveillance capitalism, or maybe the more recent exploration of enshittification by Cory Doctorow. Damn, I wish I was better at coining terms. I mean, Evan Selinger and I took our own stab at it in our 2018 book, Reengineering Humanity. Much of what we said then remains true. Unfortunately, much too much. Too prescient were our concerns about engineering unthinking humans who perform AI-written scripts and increasingly behave routinely like mechanical cogs in their own lives. In short, we described humanity's techno-social dilemma as a complex, wicked problem. Now, these types of social dilemmas are incredibly difficult to wrap your head around because there's so many interdependent parts. There's so many different actors and different agendas. And there's no panacea, there's no simple fix. But one place to start is simply to recognize the dilemma and its root causes, which are the underlying logics and imperatives. Silicon Valley fetishizes computational power, pretends that all social problems are comprehensible in the language of computation when they're not, and celebrates design principles like maximizing efficiency, minimizing transaction costs, eliminating friction, seamlessly interconnecting, among others. Now, each of these is only superficially defensible. They're not just wrong, but worse, they mislead and obscure important social, political, and economic stakes. Human beings are necessarily inefficient. While it's sometimes hard to appreciate, we actually need friction in our lives to produce meaning, authenticity, truth, and to develop capabilities that are essential to human flourishing. Seams are critical to governance. We need boundaries for ourselves and our communities. In fact, interconnection often should be seamful, as friction at the seam is what provides an opportunity and space for both self and community governance. Now, net neutrality is just one decent example, but there are so many others, as Paul Ohm over there is going to explain later in the conference. For now, my point is just to plant the seed of an alternative logic, a logic that's centered on human flourishing rather than mechanistic visions of efficiency. So I'd like to briefly discuss two general approaches to reorienting our institutional priorities and approaches to technology and governance. Each embodies a broad set of potential interventions, and there's a few others I would otherwise add if I had more time. The first concerns slow governance. Instead of moving fast and breaking everything, we should actually move slow and actually make things we need and want. We should start by dropping the umbrella term of AI and instead talk about supposedly smart technologies. Now, I realize this is probably a lost cause. AI is so ingrained in our discourse. Regardless, the idea is that whenever someone refers to AI or smart technology, you should insert supposedly in front, and then begin to ask a series of questions, such as who gains what intelligence and for what purpose? In this context, intelligence is better understood and evaluated in terms of people, real people, using actual, specific tools within specific environments to achieve outcomes. Which people, which tools, which contexts, which outcomes? These are the questions that require attention and deserve elaboration at all stages of smart tech adoption and deployment. Attending to these and other details ultimately leads into governance questions like who decides and how? What are the formal and informal mechanisms, practices, policies that govern decision-making? Now, many of you in the audience must be familiar with the struggle to decide on AI adoption and what to do with like open access to AI or AI availability. Now, I'm on a few committees at my university that struggle with these issues. But then there's also our school district and our town and our family. You get the picture. A few years ago, we published a Governing Knowledge Commons book filled with case studies that were focused on governance of smart cities, back when that was a hot topic. The slow governance approach invites a simple claim. Despite the hype, the pace of innovation, the fear of missing out or falling behind, supposedly smart systems should be contextually appropriate, justified, and demonstrably fit for legitimate purposes. In short, no hype, no speculative promises, no wishful thinking, no impenetrable black boxes. Before a city adopts supposedly smart tech or AI, it ought to be able to answer a whole series of questions that resemble impact assessments, but they go deeper into governance and require a comparative analysis of available tools for addressing one's objectives. So I strongly suggest extending the slow governance approach beyond cities to other social actors and organizations, schools, businesses, government agencies, and even families. The second broad approach I'd like to mention is pro-social friction in design. So there's an emerging interdisciplinary literature with different labels, including design frictions, frictional AI, microboundaries, programmed inefficiencies, seamful design, there's a bunch of others. A familiar example for everybody has got to be the speed bump, right? A speed bump. Speed bumps are imperfect. They involve trade-offs. No one loves them. But we need them in certain situations to slow down drivers and make streets safe for shared use. Now, they're an effective, widely deployed traffic calming measure. Fortunately, decades of rigorous research in civil engineering, urban planning, and transportation economics supports the responsible design and deployment of traffic calming measures, including speed bumps, that instrumentally leverage friction for pro-social goals. Now, unfortunately, there's nothing comparable for the digital networked environment, nor for AI. Independent academic research is essential in this area because in various sectors, the only entities with sufficient resources capable of testing different designs and frictional interventions are the private sector companies themselves, the big tech platforms. And they're not obliged to openly disclose results, much less the details about which experiments they're actually running. To make matters worse, the friction in design tested and deployed by companies often serve their own interests rather than the interests of users or society more generally. And what that means is that it often ends up being antisocial rather than pro-social. This is reflected well in growing concerns about dark patterns, about addictive, deceptive, and manipulative design, for example. Again, I've got plenty more to say on the topic, but for now, just keep in mind the idea that pro-social friction in design is an essential feature to consider when evaluating AI and tech deployment, especially when thinking about the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. So I'd like to leave you, or I'd like to come back to the idea I mentioned early on about the freedom to be off, the freedom from AI, from surveillance tech, from technology designed to nudge and manipulate, from engineered determinism, the fundamental freedom to be off. Let me give you an example, just an example of one of many to ponder. So I suspect everyone in the room has had the experience of Gen AI being integrated into a software product, service, or experience. It could be word processing, Zoom, search, whatever else. Gen AI is being shoved down everyone's throats. And I'm not even talking about the cultural zeitgeist, the ridiculous commercials, the supposed necessity of every school and workplace to commit fully to it without any good reason, or even the late night interviews with CEOs who cannot imagine what it would be like to raise an infant without ChatGPT. No, I'm just talking for now about software updates, automatic integration happening in the background. Gen AI is being integrated into business and consumer software without any input or consideration of the preferences of businesses and consumers. Besides this lack of utility, the slop and hallucinations, concerns about de-skilling, among other things, Gen AI presents an unappreciated privacy risk, as it serves as a conduit for the collection of personal data and a surreptitious mechanism for manipulating users and oversupplying such data. As research shows, LLMs and chatbots exhibit sycophancy, which along with other potentially manipulative design features, can lure users into a false sense of security and trust. Now, one might wonder, why are firms integrating Gen AI so quickly? Well, one partial answer would be to avoid being left behind. Another partial answer would be to get ahead of regulators. Another partial answer would be to take advantage of the data they can collect. Another partial answer is to get Gen AI integrated before anyone, including consumers, can object. Another partial answer is to normalize Gen AI and make it seem a natural and inevitable part of the background environment. None of these answers justify integration. None of these answers genuinely reflect user preferences. This drives me nuts. I mean, I don't want it. I want to be able to opt out. I want a voice. I want my autonomy. Sebastian Zimick and I would like to propose a GPC-like approach. So for those of you who don't know, GPC stands for Global Privacy Control. In short, it's a standardized technical signal one can send from a computing device to express an unequivocal privacy preference. For example, do not collect my personal information. Now, not only is it technically viable, but many states, including Colorado, have passed laws that make the preference signal legally enforceable. This provides people with the genuine capacity to exercise their freedom, and it's wonderful. Now, just imagine the same type of mechanisms for Gen AI. Imagine being able to send a standard preference signal to indicate your desire to remain free from unwanted Gen AI integration. And imagine states passing laws that made it legally enforceable. I mean, it's in the works. We can in fact do this. We can have the freedom to be off with technology and law working together. But I must admit that every time I've ever mentioned this idea, I've always been told the same thing. Good luck, it'll never happen. To which I say, what part? And the response is always, there's no way you get it to pass politically. Fear of missing out or falling behind will kick in. Big tech won't let it happen. Well, let me conclude by saying, I still think it's worth fighting for. Our freedom to be off, to be free from AI, is paramount to the future of humanity. And it deeply concerns me that this freedom is already unevenly distributed. Thank you.
Brett, we hoped you'd get us thinking this morning, and I think you've accomplished that. We've got time for a couple questions if you'd like to take some. In keeping with Silicon Flatiron's tradition, the first question should go to a student. And so if you've got a question and you're a student, raise your hand. If you have your question and you're not a student, you can also raise your hand. But we're going to call on the student first. Any questions on a Sunday morning from a student? All right. I do see a hand up over here. Might not be a student, though.
Looks like a student.
All right. Please state your name and speak clearly into the microphone. Perfect. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the conversation. Gabrielle Daly, fellow with Silicon Flatirons, where I mostly do broadband access research. Your compelling point about the digital divide being a problem that still needs to be solved is well taken. Could you say a little bit more about the relationship between that and how that might exacerbate the inequities that AI is perpetuating that you were talking about?
Sure. So the closing the digital divide in terms of providing access is often sort of if providing access is sufficient, not only necessary but sufficient, but it's never sufficient. There's always a series of other things in terms of both quality of access and like other things, like for example, like access to, as I said, access to Wikipedia doesn't make anyone smarter. You actually need education, skill development, and other things to go along with access to the knowledge resource, to the data resource to make it useful. The same kind of point applies when closing the gap for providing broadband access in and of itself. Right, so access is a part of it, affordability is a part of it, but also you can't, part of my thought is on this in terms of making the connection, to truly close the gap, right, you want to pay attention to the quality and the conditions with which access is provided.
All right, we have one more question up front. Just 1 second, sir. We've got a lot of folks joining us online, so we want to make sure they can hear you too.
You spoke mostly about the demand side and that high tech will stop whatever you want to do. You want to say a few words about the supply side and the concentration there?
That's a good point. Like I've historically focused a lot on the demand side through a lot of my work, which is kind of interesting that you picked up on that in this talk, because I hadn't really thought of it myself until you brought it out. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the topics of the next entire panel. We'll focus on the idea of concentration on the supply side. But yeah, I think that the fact that there is concentration only is part of what contributes to the difficulty in trying to push forward any kind of intervention of the sorts that I'm suggesting.
Well, thank you. We can have one final question here, and then we've got to get back on track.
Russ Hanser, NCTA. So one objection I can imagine to your manifesto, and I'm not associating myself with this objection, but I can imagine it, is, look, I get your mushy humanism, it's fantastic, but we're in a geopolitical battle to the death with China and others, and any friction that we build into our adoption of AI is going to undercut us in that geopolitical battle. And if you're worried about dehumanization through ChatGPT, just let me tell you about what the dehumanization of the PRC controlling everything is, or moving toward those authoritarian models. In other words, I can imagine the objection that we just, and again, I'm not associating myself with this, but we can't afford your humanism because there's much bigger stakes in the bigger battle, and we need to do everything we can to win that race. And I'm just curious if you've thought about that objection and what your response to it would be.
Yes, probably don't have time to fully spell out the series of responses that one would have to sort of develop. The bottom line is the claim that's being made needs to be proven and shown, and the demonstrable evidence of that claim being made about a fear of missing out and a fear of falling behind in an arms race is often not, there's no evidence behind it to support, there's not strong evidence to support that in fact that is the concern we ought to be focused on. That's like maybe the first step along a series of steps towards why you need to reject unfounded claims. Then you can talk about why friction in design, the kinds of things I'm proposing, don't necessarily stop progress at all. Like there's another claim, which is if you do the things you're supposing, you slow anything down, any form of slowing or friction necessarily impedes innovation, which is an argument that's been destroyed for 25 years in the literature on innovation in science and technology development. So it's just not true, but it's a second claim that's part of that. And then we can keep going.
Very good. Well, clearly you got us thinking this morning. Thanks again, Brett, for your commentary. Any other questions? Track him down in the halls at Colorado Law. Professor Frischmann.